of the Transportation Commission on Monday, July 10th at 6 o'clock. The first item on our agenda is approval of the June 5th, 2017 meeting minutes. Is there anybody who wants to make a motion to approve those?
Motion to approve. Second.
Motion is made by Commissioner May, seconded by Commissioner Storm. Is there any discussion about the minutes? All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, say nay. Are there any abstentions? All right, the meeting minutes are approved. The next item on our agenda is general public comment. If there's anybody from the public that would like to speak to an item on the agenda, then we ask for you to wait for that agenda item. But if you're here to speak about an item not on the agenda, you can speak now. Just please come up to the front, introduce yourself, and share your comments.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Marilyn Hull. I live at 1621 Oxford Road. I served as the chair of the Pedestrian Bicycle Issues Task Force that completed its work last year. One of the recommendations was the creation of this commission, so it's great to see you here in action. I wanted to make a quick request, and that is that when projects are presented to you that involve especially funding that comes out of the pedestrian bicycle line item in the budget, I think it's important for you to have those presented at a regular meeting where there's public comment. It looks like what happened with the 19th and Iowa tunnel proposal was that was received by you guys at a study session, and it was my understanding that you wouldn't be making any decisions at study sessions, so I did not attend that, but I was very surprised to read in the Journal World that you had approved this grant be submitted to KDOT with $300,000 coming out of the pedestrian bicycle pedestrian bicycle facilities line. When we drummed up the idea of this commission, I think what we were hoping is that this would serve as a forum for advocates like me and others to come and discuss the pros and cons of specific projects that staff might be requesting or suggesting to you, and that we would then have an opportunity to hear from you what your recommendation was going to be to the City Commission. It felt like that didn't really happen on that project, and my request is just that in the future, when projects like that come across your radar, that they be presented at your regular meetings so that all of us in the public have an opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Marilyn. Does anyone have any questions of Marilyn? Okay. I have one question of staff. Marilyn, in her comments, said that the Transportation Commission approved that grant application. It was my understanding that there was no vote taken. Is that true?
Correct. There was no vote taken.
So the approval was really of the City Commission, at the City Commission level?
Correct.
Okay. Anyone else have any other questions? Or okay. Is there anyone else that has public comment?
Good evening. My name is Travis Robinette. I live at 1402 West 22nd Street, and I'm a part of the 19th Street Coalition. We are a group of neighborhoods and neighbors along the 19th Street corridor, and we wanted to present to you a few ideas tonight. We think that this is in regards to the 19th and O'Connell project, and we think that 19th is a neighborhood street. It passes by two schools, very close to a third, and it should be a collector rather than an arterial. A lot of stretches of 19th are even pretty similar to 21st Street. Traffic on 19th should be sustainable, allowing for safe, healthy, and welcoming neighborhoods along the corridor. And then with KU Central District already set in stone, opening up at O'Connell would create a bookend, opening up more traffic on both ends of the street. And really in the middle, there's no room to expand to accommodate for more traffic. And when we see more access, we think that means more traffic. We don't want more traffic on an already crowded 19th Street. And with 23rd Street having more room now that the SLT is open, that'll meet a lot of the traffic needs for moving cars across town. Alternatives exist to the current proposal that we feel, to our knowledge, have not been considered. The needs for the connection described by the city can be met in other ways than making the connection. We would like to see the connection taken out, essentially, but at the same time, we do understand that the street has a poor pavement condition index score and the water mains are breaking. So we support meeting the essential needs on 19th Street between Harper and O'Connell, so fixing the water lines, repaving the road, but taking out the connection. It would also be a less expensive option. We support encouraging bicycle and foot traffic between 19th Street and Venture Park by connecting pedestrians and bicycle routes, but not automobile traffic. So that means future Venture Park employees living in Brook Creek neighborhood would be encouraged and more apt to walk or bike if it's easier than driving. It would also provide a more direct connection to the old K10 road, which is a long-time popular bike route to Eudora. Emergency access has been brought up, the fire department and EMS vehicles. And we see that it could potentially be done directly from the fire station through the trailer park road, obviously with a little bit of working out to do with them. And that would be a direct connection right into Venture Park with a lot of the road already built right there. So transit service also could open between Harper and O'Connell by just building a cul-de-sac to let the bus turn around. And that is sort of where we stand right now. Those are our ideas. We are asking for your support in evaluating some of these alternatives before a decision is made next year about the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Any comments or? Steve?
I think maybe some other people are going to, I just have a quick comment that I can wait until Bonnie is done.
Okay.
Bonnie and Dietrich just wanted to say something real quick.
Bonnie Effman, I live in the Barker neighborhood, and I want to add that I strongly support Travis's comments, and our neighborhood as a group has voted strongly in favor of this as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Good evening. My name is Dietrich Earnhardt. I live at 1714 Mississippi Street. I'd like to acknowledge that the Neighborhoods Coalition represents several neighborhoods: Brook Creek, East Lawrence, Barker neighborhood, Schwegler neighborhood, and my neighborhood, University Place. I also would like to highlight that we had a very engaging and thoughtful discussion last Wednesday with City Commissioners Stuart Bowley and Lisa Larson. They instructed, if not encouraged us, to come here and actually speak to you to get the ball rolling properly. I'd like to echo the points that Travis and Bonnie have brought up. We see the connection along 19th Street, connecting between Harper and O'Connell as a means of increasing the amount of car traffic in our city rather than actually persuading people to be on foot or on bicycle. And because of that, we don't feel it actually helps to create a more safe and healthy city. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dietrich. You want something to say, Commissioner Evans?
Just quickly, I think 19th Street needs to be studied from Iowa Street to the end of the world. And I have a lot of questions that I won't go into tonight, but we've agreed to put this on our commission agenda in the fall and study it thoroughly. And you all will have plenty of opportunity to be very engaged in this thing as it moves forward. So thank you for these. These are very helpful. we're going to take a long, hard look at this. Okay.
I just want to clarify on our future agenda for the study session on November 9th. It says East 19th Street, Harper to O'Connell. And some of the concerns raised tonight are about the entire length of 19th Street. Is it possible for that study session to be more inclusive of the entire street?
Yeah, absolutely. That's just the name of the project, the construction project, but it will involve discussing 19th Street beyond Harper, so.
And I was curious if you've also received a copy of this, and
Yeah.
is staff preparing a response to it?
This is the first time I've gotten this copy tonight. We've gotten a lot of questions on the project. We have are beginning work to revise the travel demand information for T2040 that's being revised, and we should have that information this fall. That includes a scenario that doesn't have the connection to 19th Street at O'Connell versus one that will, with the full build out of Venture Park. So that information will be we'll have to provide you here this fall. It should be completed this fall. It's that Jessica and staff's working with that T2040 revised plan. And we're also be getting some revised traffic counts from KDOT that have after data from since the SLT has been open that we're getting after September of this year. So we should be able to get a lot of traffic information and just present the data, pros and cons, and look for the group to make an informed recommendation to proceed with the project if we do proceed with it. Right now, it's planned for 2019 construction in the 5-year CIP, and we would anticipate getting some feedback this fall and going through that public process, and then beginning design plans in 2018.
Okay. So the staff response right now would be just to wait till November 9th? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's wait till November 9th. It'll be this fall. I think when we were laying out this schedule with the mid-month topics, we just set it in there at November 9th, but things could fluctuate. So I do, it will be this year that we begin discussing it, but I don't have the firm date.
And I would say November 9th, I'm Jessica Mortinger, I'm the Senior Transportation Planner with the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Organization. And David mentioned we're in the process of updating Transportation 2040, which serves as the long-range plan for Lawrence and Douglas County. As part of that plan, November 9th won't be the only date where people will have an opportunity to talk about this in terms of some of the issues that are raised by this neighborhood coalition, including the functional or the classification of the street. One of the things we do when we update our long-range plan is review what's called the major thoroughfares map, and that's the planning map that the city uses to designate how they're going to develop and at what level they develop streets, whether it's arterial or collector or local. And some of those decisions impact what ends up happening in terms of design and options and choices based on current policy, but also future impact in terms of how our community has planned to build the street networks that we create. So through that planning process that we will be doing this fall before November 9th, there will be additional conversations in that process by this coalition, but also throughout our entire community about the network of streets and how we've decided to classify them.
So for now, they should just wait for that process?
Yeah, I believe there are processes still in the works or ongoing, so at this time it would be premature to respond to this before we know all of the data that David mentioned.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other general public comment? Okay, we move on to the item number 3, which is the 18th and Indiana four-way stop request.
Good evening, Commissioners. Dave Cronin, City Engineer. Last month, we received a request to put this on the agenda this month to review. There's a traffic calming project underway in the University Place neighborhood. It's a project that has been developed over the last year. City staff met with the neighborhood to determine what the appropriate traffic calming devices would be to install in the neighborhood. It's been the highest priority project on the traffic calming list for a number of years. We proceeded with a couple of meetings with the neighborhood, ultimately agreed to put in 4 traffic circles at 17th and 18th in Illinois, 17th and 18th in Indiana, and a speed hump on Louisiana Street. These traffic calming items were in addition to a diverter that was installed in 18th and Main and a speed table or raised crosswalk at 18th and Louisiana. So the project this summer with those other 2 projects done a few years ago were all incorporated in a neighborhood plan over 10 years ago. And we're finally working to complete that plan. So when we went through the meeting with the neighborhood, we decided to revisit the original plan that had traffic circles at the intersections of those 4 intersections. Kind of discussed traffic circles versus speed humps mid-block and the pros and cons to them. Ultimately, the neighborhood decided they were in favor of the original plan to put in the traffic circles. When we were going through those meetings, staff recommended not reinstalling the 4-way stops at the intersections because, as we like to mention with the 4-way stops, they're not an effective traffic calming device, and when we they also induce higher mid-block speeds. So, you know, if we were going to do the traffic calming circles, the recommendation was to remove the stop signs. If the neighborhood wanted to keep the stop signs, we were recommending to do the mid-block speed hump. So, you know, with that being said, during the discussions, we had a lot of neighbors that said, well, we would prefer to have the stop signs and the traffic calming circles, and ultimately, we proceeded with the plans not to include the stop signs, but mentioned to the neighborhood after the project was done, if there were still concerns over the intersection control, we would reevaluate the need and get traffic data and make a recommendation. So that's a little bit of the background. We produced the plans and started building the project here this summer. Like I mentioned, we've had these requests to keep the 4-way stop at 18th and Indiana. There was a student that is visually impaired that walks through the intersection to get to Lawrence High every day. And so that's certainly a concern if we're going to be changing the intersection control at 18th and Indiana from the existing 4-way stop. So what we've done is we've kind of looked at the intersection and the plans. We met with the neighborhood and out on site to kind of discuss ways to proceed with this request. The student that's walking to Lawrence High will be doing that for 1 more year. He's going to be a senior this year. Based off of the lack of crash history at the intersection as a 4-way stop, and the fact that we are doing this project, we kind of looked at both the technical side, and that would be reviewing criteria for installing a 4-way stop for the MUTCD, which I've attached a list of that criteria. It doesn't appear that traffic volumes or crash history would warrant having a four-way stop. But that being said, since it's operated as a four-way stop for a number of years, and there hasn't been any crashes at that intersection, we felt that a good solution for this circumstance would be to recommend retaining the four-way stops at this intersection, in addition to adding some pavement marking for the crosswalks on both the north and the east leg of the intersection. These would be the two legs that that are being used as a crossing. So this would be another opportunity to enhance some of the safety or provide some visual guidance to vehicles that there's a crosswalk. So we met with the neighborhood out there, and I think we kind of discussed doing this as a temporary solution for this year, and then revisiting this next summer to see how it's working and whether or not to retain it as a permanent installation. We do have other traffic circles in Lawrence. We have 13. No other circles use stop-controlled signage at the intersection, so we do always want to consider driver expectancy. You start driving through traffic circles or roundabouts, which are similar in nature, and whether or not there's a sign or not doesn't necessarily mean people will obey the sign. So we do want to take that into consideration when making a decision. So I think there's a number of factors here. Obviously, on the technical side, it's easy to follow the guidelines, but we also got to realize that we got to listen to the input from the neighbors, and we have a very vulnerable user that uses this intersection. So I think that has kind of led us to the recommendation to put the four-way stop in and the crosswalks as a temporary installation, and then revisit it in the future. I think with that's a summary, and would stand for any questions.
You have any questions? Nothing from Steve?
Well, I don't have any questions, but I have a few comments.
Okay.
I thought maybe a few other people might want to chime in too, but just a few notes here. I think that I agree that keeping the stop signs at 18th and Indiana is the right thing to do, and I think this whole public process has been pretty impressive, with Brendy and others speaking in behalf. And I personally, even though I live in the neighborhood, I've learned a lot from all the input that people have brought in here. So personally, I think it's the right thing to do. Dave referred to a meeting we had a couple of weeks ago on site, and we brainstormed a little bit about, what's going on with these traffic calming circles. And I know that, when the neighborhood met a year or so ago, it was kind of awkward, I think, to be too creative here from an engineering perspective. And I really understand that criteria is pretty well founded on crash history and a lot of information. We did explore and talk about traffic calming, and Charlie, you made the comment that, the discussion we had maybe warrants a wider discussion of traffic calming, not roundabouts, but traffic calming in the city. And I think I would support that. I know when I walk through, and I think when I walk through our neighborhood and our traffic calming circles, I believe I'm going to have a different experience than I would have west of Monterey. The neighborhood character just seems a little different to me. University Place is a little more dense. People walk into KU, Lawrence High, and Cordley. There's just a lot of activity there. But when I see a car coming, and it's kind of like a grocery cart in the grocery store, you're going to have a head-on with somebody, and who's going to give. And I experienced that on these traffic calming circles when a car is coming. And it happened to me just last week on 17th in Illinois. The car was coming and our eyes met, and it was like, okay, who's going to go? And not being too foolish, hopefully I'm going to freeze. And the car's thinking, hey, he wants me to go, you know? So I'm in a gray area thinking, what the heck am I going to do? And the car's probably thinking the same thing. So there's a gray area there that I think a lot of people end up in a traffic calming circle in these neighborhoods. And we did talk about, you know, the roundabout type signs that are in the diverters that are yield for pedestrians or stop for pedestrians. And I don't really know if signage, you know, I'd trust Dave and Nick's and everybody's expertise here, but I don't know that signage is the cure-all for this kind of thing. But personally, I think it's something worth looking at, where that signage would be in a traffic calming circle, and would it make a difference or not. So those are my comments, and I'm going to throw this out here just for the heck of it. Some of our neighbors have talked about incorporating artwork into a traffic calming circle, and it's kind of, we're on the fence, honestly. Everybody thinks, yeah, that might be a good idea, but how do we do it? And I just want to throw it out there for everybody to think about. I think if it diverts attention from the driver, then it's a bad thing. But if it could be incorporated in all around town, it might actually look a lot more interesting than some of the areas that I've seen now. Schools could be involved, art classes could be involved, and if it were done with the idea that perhaps with a safety theme, maybe you could accomplish making these intersections or these circles more safe with kind of non-traditional means of looking at, you know, images that may mean something. So that may be a crazy idea, I don't know, but I thought I'd be bold enough to throw it out here and just get people to think about, well, what if we did something like that, and would it work on a, you know, larger scale in the city? So that's my 2 cents or 3 cents.
I have a couple of real easy questions. The memo says 13 circles that are currently in existence. Is that, so that will become 17?
Correct.
Okay, with these new 4?
Yeah.
And then Commissioner Evans mentioned the in-road yield sign that we had discussed during the neighborhood meeting. That's not part of the proposal that you've put together?
Yeah, it's not. You know, those signs are typical downtown where we have mounted them mid crossing. So I guess so everyone knows what we're referring to. We talked to, you know, that came up in the meeting. Those can be used at marked crosswalks. You know, we would just need to see, you know, if we were going to do that at an intersection like this, make sure that it's not in the vehicle path. I think that could be challenging with this intersection and the location of the crosswalk to be able to put that in so it's not getting hit and becomes a maintenance issue. And so, you know, that was another thing we did look at. We're not recommending to do that at this intersection. Again, you do that here, we could, you know, start putting those up all over the place. So we've traditionally just done those for mid-block crossings and not add residential intersection crosswalks. Yeah, we looked at it, but we're not recommending to do that.
And this is different than just a traditional pedestrian crossing sign?
It's different. There's it's a narrow sign that's state law, yield to pedestrians.
Okay.
It's similar to what we have out by the Journal World crosswalk on New Hampshire.
Okay.
There's one that gets temporarily placed at the farmer's market as well,
Okay.
Saturday morning.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
David, just a quick question, and this is, I mean, I think this will do, and it's temporary, but do what the intent is. My only question is on the south leg and the west leg, you don't have the stop bar. Is that just because there's no, let's call it the cat tracks for pedestrians? I'm just thinking, like, if I was a City of Lawrence driver, and I'm driving around and I've gone through other traffic circles, I'm not gonna expect to stop. Okay, yeah, there's a stop sign, but a little bit more guidance and a stop bar. I'm just asking.
Yeah, there's not a stop bar on the south and west leg because there's not the
cataracts.
the crosswalk pavement markings. So
Okay, I'm just asking the question.
So my comment would be, I think a lot of people are creatures of habit and they drive the same street. And so if they're already used to it, I think that they're gonna look for it. And, you know, an extra step, because a lot of times when I go through roundabouts, people don't know what the word yield means.
Right.
So an extra stop sign, I think, but I'm just saying, I think people are a creature of habit, and if they're already used to that on that street, I don't know if it's gonna make, I don't think it's gonna make that much difference with them saying, well, these streets didn't have it, but this one did. So,
Any other questions? Okay, let's open it up for public comment. Brendan? Oh, Carol? Who's going first?
If I could make a short comment about,
Carol, do you mind?
is that okay? Okay. Thanks. Hi, Brendy Latari, 1746 Mississippi Street, and I've initiated the request on behalf of my son, who would really have been here on all these meetings, but he's in camps and stuff like that. So I just wanted to publicly thank Dave a lot for the process and, you know, helping us understand the standards, which I really believe are super important, and then also being willing to listen to my request because it's an exception, I think, to the standards. I don't think in the books anywhere you're going to find much, if any, data on a blind pedestrian using any device anywhere. So it's really, I really have appreciated being able to kind of make that request. And specifically about the crosswalks, that there's 2 and not 4 on that intersection. If it's not a lot of trouble, I was going to ask tonight if you think it would be okay to go ahead and do all 4, partly because of driver expectations, partly because I don't think it's, I think based on your comments, going to require a whole lot more from the city, and as far as investment goes, knowing that the entire 4-way stop plus crosswalks is a temporary thing. I just have had a couple of comments from other neighbors, and I sort of had a thought about it myself, and then hearing from another couple of neighbors, I said I would mention it tonight. If we go ahead and paint all 4, I think it might help somewhat with driver expectations and just alerting that, yeah, there aren't stop signs at all the other traffic circles. This one seems to have 4-way stop signs and 4-way crosswalks. I just feel like it might help drivers make the connection that the stop signs are there for these crosswalks. So I was just going to ask if, you know, if you thought this city might support doing just painting all 4 crosswalks instead of just 2. And that was it. But thank you.
My name is Carol Bowen. I live at 403 Dakota Street. And this commission was one of the things I've been pushing for over 20 years, so I'm glad to see it's finally happening. I have some comments in this particular situation. I agree with the idea that it should be 4-way crosswalks because it's more symmetric for the driver to see. But in general, I've been watching the meetings, not always here, sometimes on YouTube, and I'm trying to encourage you to think on a broader scale. To tell you the truth, I was somewhat aghast that no one even discussed ADA as a request for this. Because if you discuss it in terms of ADA, if it's not an unreasonable request, you go ahead and do it. Now, David came up with a good solution, which is fine, but I wish you would get that ADA discussion out there. You are not just technical people. You are supposed to represent a broader picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Is there any other comment from the public? Dietrich?
Dietrich Earnhardt, 1714 Mississippi Street. Again, I'm curious to ask a question. Why is it that pedestrian markings are not automatic at all the traffic calming circles? I mean, I would think it would be avoiding Steve's concern about who it is that has the right-of-way. I mean, the pedestrian would seem to have the right-of-way all the time in all traffic calming circles. Just a question. Thanks.
I'm not sure I'm the right one to answer this, but I think it's state law that as long as you're in a crossing, whether it's marked or not marked, the pedestrian has the right of way. And I think that's not well understood by most of the public. Dave, did you have anything to add?
No, that's pretty clear. And I think, you know, it just comes down to maintenance costs. So, you know, we haven't done crosswalk markings at residential streets that aren't on school routes or high pedestrian traveled routes. So not that we can't do it, it's just it comes down to maintenance costs and expense to maintain them.
David, I've been told before by previous city staff that the crosswalks are only used at signalized intersections. Now, I know that's not 100% the case, but I mean, is that a general rule? I mean, if
Generally, yes. I mean, we have marked crosswalks at roundabouts,
Right.
Which don't have signals. We have some on school crossings, but not typically on residential intersections like this.
Any other public comment on this item? Okay. The question before us is to consider the staff recommendation to approve the temporary stop sign and crosswalks. Is there any commission discussion about it?
David, do you have any concern about marking all 4 legs instead of 2? Is this just painted or is it permanent?
Yeah, this is just painted. I don't have any concerns over doing the other 2.
I mean, just for the record, I'm in support of what we're doing here, and I think it's just a good idea just to do all 4 legs of the intersection for continuity and expectancy. I'm in support of the request.
Any other discussion? So, I'd entertain a motion to approve the staff recommendation with the friendly amendment to do all 4 crossings with a marked crosswalk.
And clarification, that would include the stop bars, right, David? Okay. I'd make that motion. Second.
Motion is made by Commissioner Storm. Is that Siegelmeier? Did you?
Yep.
Seconded by Commissioner Siegelmeier to approve the staff recommendation with the modification that the crosswalks will be marked with a stop bar at all 4 crossings. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Are there any abstentions? The motion passes. The next item on our agenda is a traffic calming request along Leonard Avenue between 15th Street to 19th Street.
Underneath the computer keyboard, there's a button that says "All No." The one button that says "All No."
Oh, okay, yep.
You got it.
Okay. Hello, my name is Zach Baker. I'm a project engineer on staff here at City of Lawrence. The first item here is a traffic calming request for Leonard Avenue between 15th Street and 19th Street. This request was made back in February of this year. Details about this: Leonard Avenue between 15th and 19th is classified as a local street and is in a residential area at this location. The street cross-section is between 20 and 22 feet wide. It's paved with asphalt. There's V ditches on each side of the road for drainage, and there's no curb and gutter. The posted speed limit is 30 miles an hour. This is not identified as a safe route to school, and it is not identified as a bike route on the countywide bikeway study. There is no sidewalk on either side of the street, and there are no parking restrictions on either side of the street. So pedestrians are forced to walk in the street. Traffic counts were obtained this last May. From that data, we were able to determine that the 85th percentile speed of traffic was 36.5 miles an hour, and the 2-hour two-way traffic volume is approximately 716 vehicles in a day. The traffic calming policy for the city, I kind of have on here. You can read that, but for local streets requires that to be considered for traffic calming, the 85th percentile speed needs to be greater than 5 miles per hour over the speed limit, which is the case here with the 36.5 miles per hour. And all the other items on this particular, or all the other criteria for this particular street are not met, but condition A is met. And so because of that, staff recommends that this be considered for traffic calming. Just an aside that I also included on the report, during one of the 24-hour period, there was in excess of 12 vehicles that traveled greater than 55 miles an hour on this residential street, which I'm assuming is probably the cause of the request. So with that, I'll entertain any questions.
Any questions?
General question. Is there some point where police get called? Is there some point where traffic enforcement goes out and starts watching 55 miles an hour on the sidewalk?
When they get notified and they have time, police can do enforcement, but they don't have regular traffic enforcement operations, so.
So is it uncommon in your experience to have such a large number of cars that are at that speed?
Not necessarily. This is a particular long block between 15th and 19th where there's no stop intersections in between, so there's greater capacity for cars to accelerate to that speed. You know, if you had stop signs in shorter intervals, the driver would have to try pretty hard to get that speed, so I think that's probably the reason why it occurs here.
I have a comment and a question. I think 17th and Forest are a bike route to get to the Burroughs Trail, and there's a lot of bikes crossing Leonard right there where it kind of jags over to Forest Avenue. So there's reason to consider more traffic calming there. My question is, every 300 feet, Dave, or how many, and I know that's the design part of this, but generally, what's your rule of thumb for spacing, the speed bumps and humps?
Well, what we'll do if the request is approved and it gets on the list, when funds are available, we identify what traffic calming devices to use, and we get the neighborhood involved and see what the appropriate spacing could be. And it depends on driveways and intersections, but generally speaking, it's 300 to 400 feet. Is what we've used on long stretches of street as far as spacing goes. Again, just depends on getting the adjacent property owners to agree on it, and looking at the particular section of roadway to determine how many and what the spacing is.
And generally, what would you anticipate in a delta in the average speed or the speed limits observed after you put the speed humps in?
I don't have any data to provide you. I know we've looked at it before in the past, before and after different installations, but after they're spaced so far apart, vehicles have the opportunity to really speed up. So obviously it slows people down right where they're at, but we also want to keep the average speed down in between them as well. So depending on where you would take the speed study would determine on the speed. So I don't have any data.
The
Okay.
speed humps that we've installed recently follow the Institute of Transportation Engineers standard form, and in their text it says that speed slows down to approximately 20 miles an hour with the 3 inches. We've installed some that are 3.5 inches. If you get higher than that, you can have problems with vehicles getting over them.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, thanks, Zach. Is there any public comment on this item?
Of course. I'm Bonnie Uffman, and I initiated this request on behalf of the Livability Committee in our neighborhood, in Barker neighborhood. And one concern, when I hear traffic calming all along, I'm thinking speed bumps. A concern I've heard in the last couple of days is, wow, could it be something other than that? Is it going to affect our trees? And so I would just like clarification. Is it speed bumps, or are there any other possibilities that would be considered on this particular street?
Dave, can you answer that?
I think speed bumps are the likely device. Again, there's other things in the toolbox we can use, diverters, chicanes, which we haven't really used in Lawrence, but that would be the most likely device on this stretch of road. And when funding's available, we make contact with the neighborhood and go through discussions on what and where they would be installed. We wouldn't anticipate doing anything outside of the existing roadway. So, I know there's no curb and gutter there now, and there are open ditches. We wouldn't expect to do anything outside of the street. So we can put in speed bumps and not get into any vegetation. When we do things at intersections, like traffic calming circles, sometimes we do impact curb radiuses and landscaping, but I think the likely scenario would be speed bumps.
Okay, so speed bumps wouldn't require any work off the current roadway. If there was a traffic calming circle, it potentially could. Is that what you, okay. For a chicane, is that something that would require additional work on the road, or?
Again, it just depends on the design. We'd have to get into the details. That just narrows the road down. It's kind of a choke point. I wouldn't think that it would need to have any other geometric improvement to the roadway to put a chicane in. We just haven't used them. in Lawrence.
Okay. Does that address your,
I would like to
Questions?
say that I certainly would not want to see anything beyond the street, and I think there's a pretty strong consensus in the neighborhood about that. We really value our trees on that street, and that's pretty important to us. So there's been a bit of unrest about that. However, I want to say I strongly welcome traffic calming on Menard. I walk and bicycle there a great deal, and it's not the safest thing sometimes. Thank you.
thanks, Bonnie. Is there any other public comment on this item? Okay. Commission discussion of the item.
And we did receive, I think it was this afternoon, the 4 additional public comments that were emailed in. In case somebody didn't see those, they got added this afternoon. That were all in support of traffic calming.
There was one.
There's one that was
Okay,
opposed to
one.
it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, seeing there's no discussion, I'd entertain a motion to approve the staff recommendation.
So motion.
All right. Motion is made by Commissioner Hurt and seconded by Commissioner Dillon. Was it? Oh, Sharts, I'm sorry. All in favor of the motion to approve traffic calming on Leonard Avenue between 15th Street and 19th Street, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Are there any abstentions? Motion passes. Thank you, Bonnie. The next item on our agenda is the 10th and Indiana four-way stop request.
Okay, this is about the traffic calming request, or no, four-way stop sign request at 10th and Indiana intersection. In June of 2016, this Traffic Safety Commission received a request for a four-way stop controlled intersection at 10th and Indiana. The current configuration is a two-way stop controlled with stop signs on the east and westbound approaches of 10th Street. Indiana Street and 10th Street are classified as local streets in a residential area at this location. They are paved approximately 27 feet wide with a speed limit of 30 miles an hour. Indiana Street and 10th Street are not identified as safe routes to school and are not identified as bike routes on the countywide bikeway study. There is sidewalk on the north side of 10th Street at this intersection and on the west side of Indiana Street. Parking is restricted on the northbound side of Indiana and is restricted on the eastbound side of 10th Street. Traffic counts were taken in May of this year. The 85th percentile speed was found to be approximately 28 miles an hour, which is in the mid-blocks just north and south of the intersection. So speed is not a factor on this intersection. The 24-hour two-way traffic volume on Indiana Street is approximately 1,889 vehicles per day. The 2-hour two-way traffic volume on 10th Street is approximately 1,093 vehicles per day. Crash history was also looked at and for the last 5 years at this intersection, and that is shown on the report. I'll put it up here in a second. Within the last 5 years, there's a 12-month period where there are 5 or more crashes, which is a criteria that would satisfy recommendation for a four-way stop. However, since in November of this past year, City of Lawrence Traffic Division has added some signs to those two-way stop signs. Says cross traffic does not stop. I think this was in regard to this request for the stop signs, where the person emailing us said that they think that they lived on the corner, worked during the day, and was able to observe the intersection, and he thought that traffic going east and west on 10th Street was not stopping, because they assumed that, or they would stop, but they would pull out in front of cars traveling on Indiana Street, because they assumed that they would be stopping as well. Since the installation of those cross-traffic does not stop signs, since last November, there has been 0 accidents there. Based on that and the lack of traffic volume that would require a 4-way stop at this intersection, it is staff recommendation to deny the request for a 4-way stop, at least at this time, until, we can get more data a year from now, maybe, to see if any crashes is still an issue with this intersection. With that, I'll take any questions.
Are there any questions?
During the time we did the crash data, crashes,
Huh?
during the time we had the crashes, was that area affected by the construction going on?
I believe so, and also may or may not be relevant to this particular request, but in other studies that we've done on 9th Street there, 2016, which is the year when when there was 5 or more crashes, 2016 was a high crash rate on 9th Street as well, just north of this intersection, not real far. So there's possible that there was other outside considerations for why that particular year there was more. 2017, we've had 0 crashes. 2015, there was 3. 2014, there was 0. 2013, there was 1. So there's not a consistent track record of this being a accident-prone intersection. But as you can see, in 2016, there was 5, so that does meet criteria.
Can you clarify if these are crashes involving just vehicles, or are they with pedestrians? Or
They are with vehicles. I looked at all the reports, police reports, and these are 5 crashes that were people turning out in front of people on Indiana.
And the pedestrian plan identifies, and I think the bike plan have crash data for bicycle and ped. So did you look at those reports as well?
We did not.
I'm just curious, and Jessica's gone, so I think it would be helpful to know, in particular with crash data, if there's any pedestrian or bike crashes in the area or in that intersection.
I mean, looking at the information provided on the crashes, basically 4 months from June through September 2016, which I believe during that time, 11th Street was closed due to the apartment project. That would be one street to the south, which would put more traffic on 10th Street because there's not another crossover farther south, because now you're in campus. So during that time, I think a lot of traffic was making the turn to go east or west immediately south of 11th, which would, I mean, you got 5 crashes in 4 months, one street.
Yeah, it was, and I maybe zoom in on it better here, but it was a pretty condensed period there where the crashes occurred.
And
then
that is when 11th Street was closed.
Yeah.
Because of the construction out there.
When you review your crash history, correct me if I'm wrong, but if a pedestrian was injured, any injury accident would show up.
It would show up. So while I didn't see the particular study that the MPO would have, a police report, if a police report was filed, that would show up.
So it should have.
From what I looked at, so.
Another thing, it appears that street may be part of a transit route, and I can't quite tell, looking at the transit map, if that is the case, but I'm trying to blow it up, and it just looks like it's, yeah, so it looks like there's actually 2 routes that go on Indiana. Is there anyone that is more knowledgeable about that? I'm just thinking if there were stop signs, that would impact their operation. They'd have to stop, I assume. Is that? think in the future when that memo, when it kind of looks at the bike ped, it would be helpful to also note if there's a transit impact on the request, on the route. But I think the impact here would be it would actually slow down transit because the request would require transit to stop. If I'm reading the map correctly.
I could give my 2 cents here. I saw this on the agenda, so I thought I'd drive over there. And on the way, I was asking myself, why do I avoid 10th and Indiana? And I've been avoiding driving on 10th and Indiana forever. And so I went westbound from Mass to the intersection of 10th and Indiana, looking west, and I realized why. And the sight lines, both to the right and to the left, are not good. My question would be, what's the sightline criteria for an intersection like that, and is it met or not? If you all recall, there's a retaining wall, big stone retaining wall on the left, and gee, it's very close to the curb. The north side of the the northeast intersection, there's a huge grade difference from the sidewalk up to the homes. And in my mind, we were looking and we were nervous getting out on, crossing Indiana. And although I didn't drive there, I would think that either northbound or southbound on Indiana would have the same problem looking back to the east on 10th Street in terms of the sight line. So I would suggest that if you haven't been over there, regardless of crash data and all of that, it's a very uncomfortable situation. And that I will say. So my question, sorry for all that elaboration, but my question is, what about the sightline criteria?
That is taken into consideration. Some of that's a little more subjective. If you're traveling westbound on 10th and that retaining wall there on that I guess that's the southeast corner, if from the drawing before, like on your 18th and Indiana Street, if you're sitting back where a stop bar would be, behind like a crosswalk, that wall absolutely would block the vision. Typically, people creep up to where they can see better, and on that street, there's no parking allowed on the northbound side, so it's clear there's no parked cars like on the east side of Indiana. So you should be able to see the northbound car, and that's the direction that you're worried about, trying to make a left turn out in front of that. So that was kind of the reasoning behind going ahead with the recommendation we did. And I guess that's what we considered.
Well, you're right. That's what I did. I stopped, and then I started creeping, and I didn't know which way to look, and I got real nervous at that intersection. So I'm uncomfortable with this whole situation personally. Just after that experience, I think it seems like sightline criteria shouldn't be that subjective. That's my instinct, that it should be pretty clear what is required. I know there's going to be creep there, but I felt very uncomfortable at this intersection. I'd encourage others to take a shot at it yourselves.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. It is definitely not a great intersection. I don't think I recall seeing any of this much in Lawrence, but the use of mirrors that help people to see around intersections like this, is that something that's ever done?
I'm not aware of any, if there are, but
They're usually those concave mirrors that are positioned such that you'd be able to see oncoming traffic around a blind corner or entryway to a business or so, or if you're exiting the property. Am I the only one that's ever seen that?
Never seen one on the street.
Not, yeah, I don't know if I've seen it on the street. So your plan is to then continue to monitor this intersection to?
Yeah, if, you know, we look back at, say, November this fall, that would be a full year's data of crash history and have more of an idea if it's still a need. Had we not installed, in the middle of me doing the study for this request, I noticed that we installed those additional signs on 10th Street. So then I asked the traffic division when that was done, and they said it was done in November. And then since then, the crash history had showed that there were none. So, you know, seeing if that had fixed the problem, or we can still determine that with future crash
I don't know
history.
what the right procedure is, but I suggest this be deferred and for further study, if that's
I mean,
typical for what we do here.
I mean, I guess my only comment, I agree it should be deferred, but I mean, reaching out to the requester and let him know kind of the status, because he requested this over a year ago. I mean, okay, we went out there and put out some placards. So, I mean, I don't know how long it should take to get something to us, but this seems a little on the outside of.
I guess a thought I have is, you know, in traffic safety, we talk a lot about stop signs and not using them unless they're needed and necessity. Typically, if you would put stop signs here on Indiana, you're going to increase your mid-block speeds both ways with that, and we don't have a speed problem right now. So, with no accidents or no crashes since September of last year, it seems to have resolved itself, and I'd hate to create another problem by trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist.
What would we be studying?
I'm sorry?
What would we be studying if we?
Well, I'd suggest if you haven't, drive over there and have a look at it.
Well, I mean, yeah, but, well, you have the bad side, you're stopping.
Yeah.
The only way to correct the side is to buy the guy's wall and tear it down. That's the only way you can improve the line of sight, to clear it, or to build it up.
Well, I was uncomfortable enough to make this comment, you know, when I drove it. Like I say, what David is saying, I agree with. You know, we may be creating, you know, a bigger problem if we put stop signs there. But it's something that I'm glad I drove over and had a look at it. As I sit here tonight, I wouldn't be comfortable personally just saying, well, let's go ahead and approve not doing stop signs there. I think maybe in terms of a study, there's not a heck of a lot to study, but I think there's something to experience there that would benefit us. But that's just my one vote.
In terms of the comment about the person who wrote a year ago, he did say at the very end, or at least somehow make it clear that north-south traffic does not stop, which is what they've done. So he did get his answer.
That's maybe why he's not here tonight.
So.
Any other thoughts?
I'm okay with moving on with it tonight, but I know some people are concerned about that as well, so.
I mean, it can always come back,
Right.
so.
Yeah, well, I think the fact that you did an intervention, you know, and then it seemed to correct the problem just warrants, you know, waiting and seeing if that really did fix it. I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, I think I'm comfortable with moving forward as well, and if staff could just kind of pencil it in our agenda sometime later in the year when we can just get a quick update. I think it'd be helpful just to kind of confirm that, you know, the data's continuing to look the way it looks now.
Yeah, we can provide a report and a follow-up. We can also check the intersection side distance and see what it is with the speed of traffic when you are as far up as you can get without entering the intersection. So we can check. There's some pretty good guidance to follow for that with the signed speed limit.
No, we haven't, I don't want to get us too distracted here, but the head bike issues, task force did consider kind of head and bike crash data when they were making recommendations, and I know the MPO seems to track all that for the transportation plan. It would probably be a good practice for us to review on an annual basis crashes, and you know, just as something we would do as a commission. I don't know, nothing we need to do tonight. I just feel like that it does seem like an appropriate part of our work to be aware of sort of crash history, where are problem intersections for all types of users. So perhaps that's something that could be considered as we're continuing to kind of learn our way.
So on this item, are we looking to defer the consideration?
I'm hearing that for the most part, everybody's comfortable with making approving the staff recommendation tonight.
I'll make that motion.
Do we need to ask for public comment?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we do.
I don't know if
Thank
there
you
is any,
for
but-
catching that. Is there any public comment on this item? Okay. Seeing there's no public comment, are we ready to take a vote on this? Motion by
Second.
Commissioner Ziegelmeyer, seconded by Hamby, to approve the staff recommendation to deny the request for a four-way stop at 10th and Indiana. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay.
Nay.
And are there any abstentions? Please state so. All right, the motion passes 8 to, what do we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 to 1, did I count that right? With Commissioner Evans opposed. Just a point of clarification, Dave, do we need to have some, in terms of preparing that for the city commission agenda? I know there was some practice in the past where there was an opportunity for the dissent to make that a record of that somehow.
Yeah.
Is that something we want to do, or?
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt to have more information for, you know, if there's a reason behind voting against it, that we could provide that in the staff memo.
Okay.
So if there's.
So that's something you'll address in the memo to the
We can do
commission?
that, yes.
Okay. Does that work for everyone else? Okay, thank you. All right, the next item on our agenda is the Complete Streets policy discussion. The National Complete Streets Coalition came to Lawrence just a couple weeks ago and held a workshop. Several of the Transportation Commission members were there. I think what I hope to do is to have a discussion in our meeting about possibility of having a more formal review of our city's policy. It's about 8 years old. There's been several changes, including the establishment of this commission, and it seems to me to be an appropriate time to kind of initiate some process to review it. The policy has not been evaluated in any way that I know of, and the MPO actually calls for, doesn't say when or by whom, but it does recommend evaluating the policy, I guess, at some point. So I'm suggesting this kind of become the time to do that. For those of you that were also there, maybe you can share your thoughts on that idea, or any other comments you have about the workshop. No other comments?
Well, I'm going to get in trouble if I go first all the time. David and Catherine, there were a bunch of people there. What do you think?
But the policy's only as good as the ability to use it. And so I agree it needs to be looked at and updated if necessary, and I think that can be done. But we also need the buy-in from the community that they want a complete streets policy and they want to use it. So that's the hard part.
You raise a good point. I mean, it was only that evening after the workshop that the city commission made the decision to not follow the bike plan on East 9th Street. I think one of probably the biggest challenges with any community trying to follow a policy is it's just a policy. So it sort of establishes direction for staff, but it doesn't in any way obligate the city commission. It's not an ordinance, if you will. So, but it does make it clear to staff what's expected of them, and I think that, staff has been very consistent since the passage of the policy to always present a complete street approach to our transportation system. So, perhaps part of evaluating it might be to review if there were any exceptions to that, so that we have some sense of how often is staff kind of led to do a bunch of work that doesn't lead to the following of the policy. I mean, I think there's always going to be room for exception. I assume that'll always happen. So it's like the traffic calming policy provides direction to staff and direction to us, but ultimately the city commission's likely to make a decision that involves that policy, but may involve other considerations. So.
Any thoughts?
One that I can articulate.
Okay. Well, I really enjoyed the day. For someone that hasn't been looking at stuff like this very long, I was pretty inspired just by the information that was shared and the knowledge and care that the presenters were really very good. I think it just, kind of broadened my whole view of what we're trying to do here in a way that I think was very positive. And although they were very clear that it's not a one-size-fits-all deal by any means, I did see a lot of guidance, a lot of information, a lot of very useful tools that I'd like to know a whole lot more about. And I do think that we did spend a little time looking at reviewing the policy and making some comments. I think the big benefit to doing that would just be, expanding a knowledge base of the people that would do that. And I would be happy to be involved with that. It could probably use some updating. It could probably use some wordsmithing. And I think that would be fine. I do think it kind of broadened people's interest in knowledge of this whole concept. So I felt real positive about the whole thing.
Well,
I'll just add, I think doing an analysis of projects would be a helpful thing for us to look at, but then also trying to get a better understanding of why it's not being adopted, why it's not being implemented, and potentially looking at communities that have been successful and why they are successful, and is that differences in the language, is the differences in how it's integrated into code versus policy, and have a discussion based on that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that could be really helpful. There's, in the latest report from the National Complete Streets Coalition, they do the annual kind of assessment of all the policies in the country, and the average score is now in the 80s in a scale of 1 to 100. And they have a handful of communities that have scored 100. So they've, Emiko, the director of the coalition, she mentioned when she was here that they're actually considering changing the criteria in order to provide a higher bar for some of those communities that have kind of maxed out what they can do. And a lot of her presentation was focused on the implementation of policies rather than just the wordsmithing of the policy. And I think that's kind of where we're at 5 years into it.
I mean, my opinion is, yeah, we can wordsmith this and kind of tweak a few things, but the policy is not the problem that we're running into. We're not getting any traction, and I don't know what the "we" is, but I mean, the one thing I would say, I really enjoyed the presenters, and I thought the day went really well. What I wish, kind of on the second half after lunch, we would have talked about, instead of doing the case study or whatever, but how do we get more traction and kind of we spent half hour, 45 minutes talking about that. I mean, that could have been a whole day.
Yeah.
And then we kind of all went our separate ways, and that, let's call it, I don't want to say the knowledge leaked away, but I mean, the momentum was lost, I kind of thought.
I agree with Chris. I think the afternoon didn't have the same value to me that the morning had.
Right.
Quite a bit different.
It could have had more value.
Definitely, yeah. Dave, have you used, Castled, I know, is kind of a touchy subject, but when you all were discussing Castled, I wasn't keeping up with it. Did Complete Streets come into that discussion in a meaningful way? Either using that terminology or just the ideas of Complete Streets? Or any other project you'd rather talk about?
Well, I think the challenge is it a black and white question? Is this a complete street or is this not a complete street, and what is the definition of that? We've used the policy in a way that it's context sensitive, that we, in certain situations, we add elements of complete streets. So is it everything or nothing? I mean, sometimes it's in between. So I think on Castled, we did present two different options. One, we did label a complete streets option. The other was a more traditional street design, but the more traditional street design that had more lanes of traffic still included bike lanes and shared use path. And so it had complete streets elements. And so there was discussion, well, is that not a complete street because we're not doing everything? That's I guess the way you want to, it's subjective in a way that how you interpret how many elements are incorporated into a project. And so I think that's the challenge behind it. We haven't done a lot of data collection from projects that we've done to go back and report the effectiveness. I think I was at the workshop too when we were going through our policy, and that was one of the sections there, section 6, data collection and progress reporting. One of the things that I feel that we haven't been so strong in doing. Sometimes when we want to do a project, whether it's installing a roundabout or changing lane configuration, we do get data then from other projects, or we try to find data to justify the next project, but we don't by habit go back and get data from projects we've done. So I think we can continue to do that better. So I think that's something that I noticed in that workshop. But yeah, so unless there's some direction on, I hate to say strengthening the policy, but making it more effective or judging or some data-driven process to say, well, you need this many elements and this many, some way to score or rate a project or a corridor to meet complete streets. Unless we go down that route, I don't know what other things could help strengthen or reinforce the current policy. But that's, I think, what we need to discuss, because we get that question a lot. It came up on the Castlewood project. It's come up on other projects. 9th Street as well. You mentioned 9th Street.
So I think what Dave just pointed out, that actually I thought was the most helpful part in the afternoon, was recognizing that there hasn't been in 5 years any real routine reporting about the policy and progress toward creating a more complete transportation system. And when we do talk about it, we end up only talking about a project. And that doesn't feel like it captures the totality of the purpose of a policy like this. So if like when I was preparing for their site visit, I was contemplating all of the ways in the last 5 years that our transportation system has become more complete. And I was thinking about the arterial roads in particular. And Iowa didn't have sidewalks on significant portions of it that really were close to the intersection there at 15th and Iowa, which leads up to KU. And that seems like a really significant part of our community to not have pedestrian access. Just a few days ago, I saw someone walking on the east side of Iowa, I guess because she didn't realize she had to cross much earlier to get to the sidewalk. So, it's one of those, if there just was another sidewalk on the other side, if it could have been squeezed in somehow. Also, all along 6th Street, going west of Iowa, there were sidewalk gaps all over there. And Bob Billings has a nice shared use path that wasn't there just a few years ago. So you start adding this up, and it really does, you do realize that we've made a lot of progress around access for certain types of users. And I think that's significant. It's not captured and kind of reported on as part of the success of the policy. And I think, to me, a good way to reflect on 5 years would be to go back and kind of catalog all that, and don't try to look at just the entire road projects one at a time, because there are pieces that have been put in place that just weren't there for anyone that was looking back 10 years ago and came back to Lawrence. They'd probably notice quite a bit of progress. So I think if there's a way to do a review that would put that out there, to say here's the progress that's been made and here's how we'll measure progress going forward, that could be really useful to guide our work, really, to say, in this case of the memo, when I mentioned transit in that space, when I'm trying to think about our work, I go through this checklist of if we're saying there are certain groups that are to be considered, do we have evidence that we considered that particular user? And the big ones are bike, ped, transit, car. We could also maybe consider freight or truck traffic. I don't know if that's a truck route. I doubt it is, but those kind of things when we're looking at a street, are we aware of all the components to it, the users of it? And I don't know that's really captured in the Complete Streets policy, that kind of direction almost to us, to how do we really be holistic in our approach to considering traffic and transportation issues. So.
Well, I think at the end of the day, I agree with Dave, there ought to be some kind of scoring system, but they did spend a little bit of time talking about the design process for Complete Streets, where essentially you begin with, a clean sheet of paper, and what would the perfect solution be should there be no budgetary constraints or whatever. And then just, okay, well, now we've got a budget. You get the ideal, solutions out there to discuss, And then you just trim back from that to do what's realistic, and you're probably not going to get everything you want every time. Well, you're not. But I think the process, and I'm sure you guys, it's probably part of the process that you go through when you're looking at those projects, but I doubt if people see all of that, and, you know, that's probably okay, but I think the process would be interesting to see. We have engineers on the, all around the room, so I'm sure that's been an experience with them too.
Well, what I'd like to know if there's support for it, I think it'd be helpful to have a committee that would be charged with providing some time on reviewing the policy and providing some sort of recommendation at a future study session of this group.
I think one of the things that stuck out for me during the day, I mean, it's always kind of obvious that when you're putting in new sections of town that you have that opportunity to build it the way you want. But the complete streets approach, I keep dropping that mouse, was under this approach, even small projects can be an opportunity to make meaningful improvements, and just kind of pointing out that anytime you have a request to change, or if you're doing some improvements, or just repainting the street, that's an opportunity to step back and say, how can we apply this complete streets paradigm here and just make an improvement that, you know, in the long run at least may spur some other improvements and get us toward that goal, instead of having to just, you know, just tear everything up and start over. The idea that every time you are asked, every time we are asked to do anything or make a recommendation, we need to step back and say, how do we apply this, or how can we apply this in this case? And look at the policy. But I think, you know, I really enjoyed that day and learning about it. And I think, you know, getting this clear and having this document just be with us all the time as sort of our guide would be helpful. And then also having the city commission using it as well. And I'm not sure, I don't know, I mean, I think that you all are doing that, you know, when you think about the projects, but I'm not sure that it's translated up to the people who are making the decisions all the time. Because I don't know where that buy-in is. You know, and it all comes down to cost and funding. But if we can point out that there are ways to make small changes, or, you know, just where you put the stripe on the road sometimes can make an improvement, then we can keep working toward that. Makes sense.
I would think the city commission would be looking to us to provide perhaps a little more background and thought, at least in support of what Dave and Nick and that group does in this process. Because I agree, I think at the end of the day, they just see, you know, kind of standard, they see the end result of a long process that's had considerable thinking to it. But I think we can add a lot to that conversation, and should.
Well, I think it's important to involve the city commission somehow in the review, if not just the, you know, preparing a review of what progress has been made, but during the initial development of the policy, I was the facilitator of a committee that kind of provided public input on the draft, and we had two of the city commissioners involved on that committee, the mayor at the time and Mayor Cromwell, and then Commissioner Carter was also involved. And I think it would make a lot of sense if we're about to revise a policy that they're ultimately going to have to approve, that there'd be some consideration for what their goals would be. I think the goals of this current city commission seem to be pretty supportive. Although they, in the Castle Drive, I think there was some concern, you know, about whether they were following the policy or not. And I think maybe that's one thing that we could look at, is how do you make it clear whether the policy or whether a particular project what's the definition that we're trying to use? And if it creates confusion, then I'd say there's probably somewhat of a problem with it. So if that can be part of the review process to include them in the identification of what they see as problematic and what they'd like to see improved, that makes a lot of sense to me. So this is going to take some work, and I was hoping to get some sense from you guys if you wanted to establish a subcommittee that would be charged with doing this. And at the end of the workshop, we kind of went through next steps, and I think it was Amico, the director of the National Coalition, that suggested or threw out for as an idea that this commission take on the role of trying to do the work. So I think we'd have to probably do it as a subcommittee instead of the full commission. Any thoughts on that? Is there anyone that would be interested in being on such a committee? Whether you're at the workshop or not, I think it would be
Yeah, I couldn't
totally
make the
open
workshop
for it.
because of work constraints, but yeah, I can certainly.
Okay,
Yeah, I definitely would be interested.
all right. Is there anyone else that would be interested in being on the subcommittee? I'm thinking if there are three of us, it would probably be a good start.
Or if it depends on what it is.
I would leave it up to you guys. I mean, I feel like this is one of those things that's not going to go away, so it could be at a pace that works for you. And I imagine the group you would come up with, who's going to kind of be your convener, your organizer, chair, if you will, and then maybe come back with a tentative thought on how you might do the work if it involves a 12-month process, 6-month process. I think something for the rest of us to react to would be helpful. And then,
Why don't the three of us get together? We can talk when we're done here and see a time we could just kick it around a little bit. And then we'll report next month, if not sooner.
okay,
Okay?
all right. Dave, do we need to make any formal motion to have the three of them meet?
I would recommend doing that.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I'd entertain a motion to create a committee to review the complete streets policy, the committee being composed of Commissioners Schartz, Dillon, and Evans. Anybody like to make that motion? Commissioner Hamby makes the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Severin. Any other discussion? All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. And any abstentions? Motion passes. Thank you guys for taking that on. Look
Sure.
forward to hearing more. All right, we're on to item 7, receiving staff reports.
Yeah, attached is a report on the Collector Street information with the driveways. If you remember, a couple months ago, we had that question with Kensington Road that didn't meet even the traffic volume criteria for a local road, yet it was classified as a collector street. And you asked us to see how many other situations there could be similar to that. And so Zach put together a report and can kind of go over that real quick.
Yes, so as David said, the street in question at that time was Kensington Avenue between 25th and 27th Street. And while it did meet criteria D for collector streets because there's residential area with more than 50% of the street frontage consisting of driveways, the traffic volumes were so low that request was ultimately denied. And then it was asked, how common of a thing is that on our collector streets in town? So we put together a report cataloging all the collector streets. And so in Lawrence, we have 66 collector streets. And to do the report, we broke that up into each collector street into sections. For instance, Harvard Street pretty much extends all the way across town. Some sections are more residential than others, so it wouldn't be fair to classify one whole street, one thing, without doing it in segments. So another example would be like George Williams Way, which ends up being one of these a few exceptions, like Kensington Road, where George Williams Way, north of 6th Street toward Rock Chalk Park, that wouldn't meet the criteria D for a residential area, and even immediately south of that, the same scenario, but if you get down closer to Bob White Drive, there it is a residential area. So that's kind of how we broke everything down. So of the 66 collector streets in Lawrence, 35 have at least one segment along their route that would have significant driveways that would meet the traffic calming policy. However, of those 35, only 5 also have such low traffic volumes like Kensington Avenue or Kensington Road, where it doesn't even meet, a local street criteria for a traffic calming device. One of those 5 is already currently on our list for adding traffic calming, but that's kind of the breakdown. If you want me to get into more detail, I can. It's just kind of for your information. So I guess in summary, it is not very common to have a collector street with that low of a traffic volume on it and also be residential. So
What does the NA, is that just mean?
not available, or yeah. We have certain intersections that we had counts, or maybe we had counts in certain, one or two stretches of Harvard, but in 3 or 4 others, we didn't. But on some of these, like Mass Street, Tennessee Street, Kentucky Street, it'd be a safe assumption to say that it's going to be a pretty high traffic volume, so it wouldn't be a local street type traffic volumes.
Well, thanks for doing this. I think it kind of validates the decision that we made that night. So it doesn't sound like there are a lot of examples where we'd be making that exception, I guess.
No, even more in depth, of those 5, 2 of them are basically the same area. It's Kensington between 27th and 25th, and then 28th Street. It's like the connector, it's just a little short street segment. So that technically is a different street, so, it's 28th Street, but it's basically the same little area. So yeah, not common.
Thank you. Is there anyone else has any questions, thoughts? Okay. All right, the next item was the conflict of interest.
Yeah, last month we got a question regarding if you're subject to conflict of interest, and so I followed up with Randy Larkin, the staff attorney, on that question, and forwarded you some correspondence on his response in the definition of the conflict of interest. So you are subject to conflict of interest as a transportation commissioner, and if you had any particular instances where you feel you may be subject to that, you could feel free to give us a heads up, and we could determine if that's the case or not, or you could always abstain from voting on your own on any issues. So if there's any questions on that, I can follow up with, let me know.
So it was specific that related to business or a financial interest, not, hey, the neighbor across the street that's, it's totally a different deal.
Right.
Correct.
I think if you read the statute, it's pretty clear what the definition is.
Yeah.
So if there's nothing else on that, I'll move on to the next item, which was the Manhattan Kansas ordinance on hands-free device. Last month, during public comment, we had a citizen request looking at what could be done to strengthen that ordinance, and the direction given to us was to provide you with what what they have in Manhattan, Kansas, which is attached to the agenda. It's similar to the state traffic ordinance, but it kind of, it's hands-free device completely and not just texting. The current state statute and ordinance is texting and driving. Manhattan, Kansas adopted the stronger ordinance, and I think it was 2011. That is talking, doing anything with your phone if you're driving. So attached is kind of the language that they used. Also, we followed up looking at any bills on texting and driving or on the subject over the last few years on the state level, and there hasn't been any bills introduced going back to 2011, and the law was last amended in 2010. So that's just information if you guys want to, if the group wants to evaluate that policy.
I'm kind of curious if Manhattan, if they've done this some time ago, have they done any reporting about how effective it's been?
I don't know. I've heard just from folks that live in Manhattan that I've asked about that they do some random enforcement of it, where they have police officers observe people that are driving, and if they see someone on their phone, they'll go up and knock on the window and give them a ticket. But that's just through conversations I've had. And but if there's, we could follow up if you guys direct us to do more research and see if there's other data that they've done as far as enforcing, because I think that's the, you know, you can adopt the ordinance, but it's enforcing it to make it more effective. That could be the challenge. But
is it something that our local law enforcement could assist you with, or would that be appropriate? I mean, I'd kind of like to know if their opinion on this, if they think it's really not a high enough priority that they wouldn't be able to enforce it, or if they see problems with it, it would be helpful to know that.
Yeah, we could discuss
They
that with
might
the
have data on
police department. I mean, you know, we talk about speeds a lot, speed limits and enforcing speed limits. It's I would imagine the response would be similar to that. It's as they have time to enforce it. So
right.
But you know, I think it could be a good idea to get some information from Manhattan if they've got data on how well they've been able to enforce it, and then discuss with our police department if it's a realistic thing to enforce based off their staff time.
Anyone else have questions or comments?
Well, I think I understood your question. Is this the right conduit to make something like this move forward?
Well, you know, if it's something that you want to study and provide a recommendation to the city commission on, I think it is the right conduit. It's the right stage to begin the discussion. So, and I think that's why when the requester made the request, they were directed to speak to this board first. They came to the city commission as well, but I think that's definitely under your purview. It's a transportation-related item. I think as we see data and studies that crashes are increasing and the trends are kind of changing because of inattentive driving. So I think there's a lot of studies and research that's been going on, and that trend seems pretty apparent that's increasing. So, you know, I think if there's ways to enforce it, a lot of it's education as well, to make progress on that. I think it's could be a worthwhile item.
I was just, oh, go ahead, sorry.
David, you had mentioned that you thought Manhattan's ordinance was based on state law, is that right? Or that the state law is no texting, and then Manhattan had gone one step beyond that, is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
So texting is illegal while driving?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
In the state of Kansas?
In the state of Kansas.
Just making sure.
Yeah.
I haven't seen too
And
many.
there's some exceptions that are, there's some exceptions, emergency,
Right.
and.
All the stuff listed
Yeah,
in
there's
here.
a few, yeah. So some of the same exemptions on the Manhattan ordinance are the same as the state law on texting, but it's just, they expanded it to hands-free device. So if you're talking on the phone or doing
I just find
whatever
it
else,
amazing
So
all the
your
people I
point
drive
being,
by.
they don't really
I just think
enforce
it's.
the texting.
Well, I mean, I'm going to say, I drive by a lot of people that look like they're texting, so I'm just trying to understand.
Well, and you could be surfing the internet, you could be doing a lot
Playing
of
with
things
your
that,
phone.
that aren't texting.
Right.
And that's legal in Kansas. You just can't text. So,
So this makes it clear you have to be hands-free.
Right.
yeah.
Do we have local data on cell phone use and crashes? Do they keep track of that as
Distracted
a
driving or?
factor in?
not that I'm aware of.
I think that's a great question to ask the police department, if we can get them to come here and talk to us about this. I mean, so, can you try to do that? Get the police department to come and present whatever their thoughts on this, or if they have any data, that would be terrific.
Yes. Can do that.
And if you could get any data from Manhattan too, that would be helpful.
Yeah. I'd especially like to be helpful, I think, if the law enforcement would contact Manhattan and find out like how it's working from their perspective there. Okay, thanks for following up on that. All right, the next item on our agenda is commission items. This is just a spot for any of us that have either items to bring up that aren't on the agenda to do so, or questions of staff. This is the time to do it. Anyone? Okay. Seeing there's no items from the commission, we'll go on to the calendar. We did receive an announcement about a bicycle-friendly driver program. That'll be Wednesday, July 19th from noon to 1. I think that was sent out by email. Any other calendar items? Okay.
The mid-month meeting
Yep,
is?
mid-month meeting on Thursday.
And that's, what's the topic?
The topics are transit operations and discussion on the infrastructure sales tax referendum.
Oh, yeah. Exciting stuff. Okay. See, there's nothing else on the calendar. Is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Hamby.
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Storm. Any abstentions? And so adjourned. Or any opposition?
Oh, yes, let's stay for another hour.